One of the sources of our faith in the Unitarian Universalist tradition is words and deeds of prophetic people which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. Today I want to talk about some of the people who've done that at this congregation or here in Knoxville, focusing on some local people. The first person I want to tell you about is Annie McGeeMcClung, who looks like kind of a stern Victorian woman. But she helped found a Unitarian church here in the late 19th century, and she also helped found the Crittenden Center, a home for unwed mothers. And in Victorian times, a woman who had a child out of wedlock would be ostracized and judged and condemned, and yet she created a safe place where young women could come and give birth to their children and find loving homes for them, or be able to provide that loving home for themselves. Another person who's made a difference here in Knoxville, and you may have seen this statue in downtown in Market Square. This is a statue of Lizzie CrozierFrench. She's out front. She helped organize the effort to get women the right to vote here in Tennessee. And if you know anything about the history of women's suffrage, you know that Tennessee was the last state that was needed for women to be able to vote all over the country. So Lizzie CrozierFrench made a huge difference in changing the world. Now, she helped start a church here in the 1920s, but it didn't last too long. But in 1949, a church was founded, which was then called the Tennessee Valley Unitarian Church. We're now called the Tennessee Valley Unitarian Universalist Church. But in its first year, a man named Jim Pearson came up to the door. It was actually pronounced Pearson, Jim Pearson, but spelled like person. And Jim Pearson walked up to the door, and the sign said, "Everyone welcome," and he asked, "Does that sign mean me?" Now here's a picture of Jim, and to use the words of Duncan Teague, that's a little bit of pepper and a lot of salt. Now what you need to know is that Knoxville was a segregated city, segregated by law, so inviting a person of color into a white congregation was an act of civil disobedience if it was meeting in a public building, and we were meeting in a public school. But the usher, Harry Worsama Sr., said, "You are welcome," and he came and became a part of the congregation, and the congregation voted to challenge the segregation laws and an act of civil disobedience, and was accused of communism for it. So Jim Pearson did a huge transformative job for our congregation and for the community, because we were the first predominantly white church in the community to challenge segregation laws. This next picture is of Jack Lafleur and his wife Edna. Edna was an elementary school principal, and Jack and Edna were both leaders in the Knoxville sit-in movement. They were part of the organizing committee. But Jack went to see his mother at what is now the University of Tennessee Medical Center, and they wouldn't let him eat in the cafeteria, so he did a one-person sit-in in the cafeteria until they agreed to take down the signs. Now, it took a lot longer to actually change the policy, but I think of Jack Lafleur every time I eat in the cafeteria of the hospital there, where there are people of all races and all nations, medical professionals and patients and family, and I am grateful for Jack Lafleur and the way he helped change the world. There were a lot of young people who were part of what was called the fellowship camps. And the fellowship camps were an effort to get children of all races together before the schools were integrated, so that they could have camp and develop friendships and learn how to live together in peace, and then help lead the way in integrating the public schools. So I'm really grateful for those young people that were able to do that and help lead the way in the school integration efforts. Another person that you've probably seen in the fellowship hall is Greg McKendree. It's a very big picture, but he was a very big man. And Greg McKendree was the guy who would sit at the front door when we were hosting the Spectrum Coffee House, the Spectrum Cafe for GLBT kids and their friends who were allies. And it was a very controversial thing. It was extremely controversial, and people were worried that somebody might come in to hurt people or harass people. And Greg McKendree would stand at the door, a big bear of a man, and he would welcome people, but he was also prepared to be a bouncer. And so Greg McKendree was one of our heroes. He died when a hate crime was committed in our sanctuary, and he was shot and killed. A woman in that sanctuary says that he stepped in front of her, blocking the path of the bullet, and she knows she wouldn't have lived without Greg McKendree. So he was our hero, but he was a hero before he died. He was a hero in the way that he lived. I was very fortunate to witness firsthand the transforming power of love in someone who was our ministerial intern at the time, John Coffey. On the day that the Supreme Court ruled that same-sex marriage was legal, we had a tradition of offering weddings to same-sex couples before the Supreme Court decision. But John Coffey was very especially attentive to this Supreme Court decision. And on the day the Supreme Court ruled it was legal, we rushed down to the courthouse so that we could provide weddings for anybody who was interested. But there was nobody there waiting in line. So John called his partner Keith, and so we had our church hosted the first legal same-sex marriage here in Knoxville. It was crazy fun. It was crazy transformation. There was a lot of homophobia in Knoxville when I first moved here in the 80s. I couldn't even imagine that day when the Henley Street Bridge was lit up with all the colors of the rainbow flag. It was a transforming moment. And John Coffey was a huge part of leading the way. I also want to lift up Andrea Williams, who, as I speak, is about to do her last session as the moderator of the Unitarian Universalist Association. She's a co-moderator. This is the highest level volunteer leadership in the Unitarian Universalist Association, and she comes from our church. I am so proud of her. I've known her since she was a little girl, but she is not just a top-down leader. She's at the top of our denomination, but she's a grassroots leader. She's worked at the Highlander Center, and right now she's working at creating and helping grassroots efforts to work for change online in the middle of a global pandemic, but also beyond that, helping activists connect with each other all over the world and learn how to change the world together. Well, in our church, at the beginning of the service, we say, love is the spirit of this church and service is its law, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This is our great covenant. So I'm grateful for all the people in the history of this church, many of which I have not had a time to name, but I'm grateful for all the people who've helped change the world, and one of those people who might change the world is you.